Hey, Agile people. Welcome to this episode of Agile Bytes. I'm Phil Ledgerwood. This is powered by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner, just day in and day out. It's what we do. And I'm really excited for this particular episode because we have a special guest with us. Chris Stone, the virtual Agile coach, kind of made a lot of waves on LinkedIn with his themed Agile retrospective templates. And so the reason we got him is because several episodes ago, in fact, it was our first episode, I talked about retrospectives and shared a certain opinion about themed retrospectives. And it was an opinion I shared again on LinkedIn and got a number of really good responses. And Chris weighed in on the topic as well. Again, he's very well known for the themed retrospective. And although I don't think either of us had a huge conversion moment where all of a sudden we totally changed our opinions on any particular thing, I thought the discussion was really enlightening, and it did certainly soften my views on certain things. A little bit later, a commenter, Nick Perry, would come in also kind of defending themed retrospectives. And he just had a very thoughtful and purposeful way of using themed retrospectives that kind of warmed up my cold heart, toward themed retrospectives. It made me so much less mean when I talk about them. And I thought Chris's views were so well articulated and so well thought through that for our audience, I wanted to have someone on who could kind of give a different view on this topic than I might give, because I think his view is really valuable and deserves to be heard. So welcome, Chris. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Phil. It's a pleasure to be here on the Agile Bytes podcast today. And as you say, you and I have had a bit of discourse back and forth on LinkedIn primarily. A difference of opinion, you might say, but in the pursuit of the right things, which is continuous improvement. So I welcome the healthy conflicts, the difference in opinion, because that's how we get innovation and great results. So I'm looking forward to our chat today.
Yeah, absolutely. Side note, people, you should make friends with people who think differently than you do from time to time. That's a good thing to do, right? Get out of the
Escape your echo chamber.
Exactly. Yeah. Get out of the echo chamber for sure. I mean, how are you ever gonna grow, right? So, Chris, to start out with, some people who listen to us are probably already familiar with you. You may be new to some people. Could you maybe kind of tell us a little bit about your journey to get into Agile coaching in general, and then kind of what sort of took you down this path of now you're the themed retrospective guy?
Right. Well, I think my journey into Agile coaching probably mirrors that of many others. I learned about Agile at university. I was on a project management master's course, and Agile was about formally I say, under 10 years old from the manifesto at that point. And it was then when I was working as a project management graduate at a consultancy that I encountered Agile in the wild. And at the time, it was all Gantt charts and all those delightful things. It was all project, scope, schedule, all that focus. And I remember working with this developer for a third party, the lead developer called Shebin, and I had to translate back what he was telling me into Gantt charts because that was the way we were working at the time. And he said to me, "Chris, we're doing things in Agile." And I was like, "Yeah, I've heard of this, but what does that mean for our schedule and our Gantt charts, etc.?" He said, "Well, we're doing things in sprints." And as we spoke, I just thought, right, I'm seeing this in the wild now, and it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't you want to inspect and adapt what you're doing regularly? Why wouldn't you want to use what you learn to alter your trajectory accordingly? Why wouldn't you want to have those fast feedback loops? And that's for me what Agile is all about, fast feedback loops that enable that learning, that course correction.
Mm-hmm.
So from being as a project management graduate and discovering Agile in the wild, becoming enamored by it, I would call myself an evangelist at this point. I began doing more Scrum Mastery type work. I worked with Accenture and began helping other new projects set up in an Agile way. That took me into Agile coaching, where I was working with teams of teams and coaching more at the program level. And then from there onto the enterprise level, where I was helping bring about systemic change, helping set up ways of working, minimum viable bureaucracy that enables those fast feedback loops, those time to learning. And now that's what I do at the enterprise level quite typically, work with teams of teams, trying to bring about cultural change and bring about the benefits of agility. Now, where the themed retrospectives thing came in Once upon a time, I was a Scrum Master,
Hmm.
and I was doing and facilitating retrospectives regularly. And I saw just disengagement and the stale questions, and I would be using the common formats that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with: the stop, start, continue, the sad mag lads. Every now
Hmm.
and then, there might be a sailboat or a hot air balloon used. And I discovered when I was searching for a different way of doing retrospectives, I was using tastycupcakes.org, which was a popular resource, a favorite of mine at the time. I came across the Elvis retrospective.
Okay.
I think, if I recall, that was the one that you and others on LinkedIn had been talking about. We don't want this Elvis retrospective. I just want to
Uh,
focus on the work, right? I'd came across that, and I just thought, oh, this is cool, right? It was using the discography from Elvis, those popular songs,
mhm.
to generate insights in a slightly different way. So, don't step on my blue suede shoes. What shouldn't we be stepping on as a team? And return to sender and things like that. And I liked it. I thought it was cool, so I experimented with it, and it just brought more engagement than I'd ever seen from a retrospective. So that was the king of retrospectives, and I thought, wow, I need to create the Queen. So Queen, the rock band, the retro, then
Oh,
happened.
nice.
I grabbed a
Nice.
great image of Freddie Mercury, and I had the team dot voting with Freddie Mercury's rather than just stickers.
Hmm.
And rather than just asking, what should we continue doing as a team, you could be playing "Don't Stop Me Now," that famous Queen song typically sung at 2 in the morning in a nightclub, and it's like, what should we absolutely not stop doing as a team? Where are we really excelling? What are we great at?
Hmm.
So I began creating these themed retrospectives. It just took off. There was so much demand from it. And the stories that I hear from people that have used them in terms of the engagement and the joy that it brings those in the workplace keeps me doing it. That particular retrospective, the Queen one of my favorite stories that I've been shared anecdotally from someone else was that there was a very serious program manager who never smiled and was all work, work, work. And they tried this Queen retrospective, and he admitted that he loved Queen. It was one of his favorite bands, and he connected with the team more than he ever had. And he smiled, and I thought that was beautiful. It just
Yeah.
broke down some of the barriers and took someone who was very work focused. There's nothing wrong with that, but we spend so much of our lives in work. And I'm a firm believer that the workplace can be fun. With a bit of creativity, with a bit of energy, it can be something you enjoy.
Hmm.
So, yeah, that's a bit about my journey and how I discovered and began creating themed retrospectives. I'm now on almost 100 retrospective templates I've
Uh-huh.
shared with the world, all freely accessible.
Sure.
I don't kind of put them behind any sort of paywall, or there's no requirement to subscribe. They're just freely accessible because I like the fact that people can use them, access them, and bring a bit of fun to what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And for those of you who are listening who are interested in those templates, if you just follow Chris Stone on LinkedIn, he puts these templates in his feed and you can just get them right off of there. That story is really interesting. It makes me think about that part of the Grinch when he steals Christmas and he's over the village and he's got all the stuff and he hears the Who's singing and then all of a sudden his heart grows. It's kind of like that product manager you were talking about. Like, oh, I heard the
Yeah,
quick.
his heart grew three
That's
sizes.
right. I heard the Queen song, and I mean, gosh, how do you get mad at that? How do you get mad at a Queen themed retrospective? That actually sounds like a lot of fun. And one thing you also mentioned, which was a strong point of agreement when we talked, was that what I'm going to call the quote unquote traditional retrospective format, where you kind of go around the circle and everyone says, "Here's what I think we should stop doing. Here's what I think we should start doing. Here's what I think we should keep doing." I think we both have a pretty healthy mistrust of that format. Not that it can't be productive, obviously. Teams can use it productively, but I think we've both, from what we've seen, the disengagement, right, the disparity as individuals kind of retreat into their own private worlds in a format like that. You and I have both become very disillusioned with that. So tell us a little bit about what makes a themed retrospective different, and kind of what the basic structure of it is. So let's say you were about to facilitate a retrospective. Kind of give me a bird's eye view of what that's going to look like.
Sure. So, a themed retrospective. It begins often with me, with the team choosing what that theme is, right?
Hmm.
So I don't come in and just go, right, guys, you're doing the Queen retrospective today. I allow them to select which one resonates from them, or I make a
Okay.
recommendation based on what I know about the team.
Okay.
Every team has a microculture.
Hmm.
Every team is comprised, sorry, of individuals with passions and interests, likes and hobbies and dislikes. And I think you can celebrate those microcultures by building in ways of working to the team that fit them. And themed retrospectives can be a way of doing that. So if you've got a team that's passionate about video games, why not use a video game themed retrospective? If you've got a team that loves music and has their own Spotify playlist, why not build one around their playlist? There's lots of ways of doing it. So it begins with, what do the team resonate with? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can start to build the atmosphere before the retrospective. You've got the agenda in your calendar invite, and you could be saying, fellow adventurers, today we're going to be going on a hero's journey, and you're doing the hero's journey theme, or we're going to be dipping into your Spotify playlist and discovering what's our greatest hits, or whatever it may be. You can begin to build the atmosphere outside of the retrospective. You can be doing it by sending a message a few hours before in the Slack channel, or whatever comms channel you're using. So that's where it goes, right?
Hmm.
Then
Okay.
we're in the retrospective. The starting point inside the actual time box for the retrospective is the retro prime directive, where we're trying to build the foundations for psychological safety and a context of unconditional positive regard. If anyone isn't familiar with the prime directive, it's one of my first recommendations for you to familiarize yourself with, because it just simply says that it doesn't matter, essentially, it doesn't really matter what's happened. We understand everyone has done the best they can with what they've had available to them at the time,
Hmm.
whatever skills, resources, knowledge, etc. they
Hmm.
had available to them. So that's for me where it begins. Then a themed retro. Let's say we're using the Queen, the Rock Band retro. You've got 4 to 5 prompts available. They are often built in a way that enables the team to generate insights around positives, negatives, future spection, yes, so future thinking, a range of different things.
Okay.
And again, the empowerment continues by allowing the team to choose which prompts most resonate to their situation.
Hmm.
So it's not that I am coming in and saying, right, pick a random prompt, guys. It's, right, which one of these is most important to you right now? Where do we need to focus? Okay. So let's say we're doing, some example prompts, by the way. So if we're doing the Tinder retro, you've got, what do we super like as our way about our ways of working? So what do we up swipe on if you're using a Tinder app? If you've got the Journey, the Rock Band retro, you've kind of got don't stop believing. Where shouldn't we stop believing as a team? Where should we persevere about how we're working? If you're doing an American football retrospective, you've got draft day, right? So where do we need to draft in new skills to the team? Where should we be focusing on to build out our team's skills base? If you're doing a James Bond retrospective, you could be doing, for your eyes only. Where are we keeping things to ourselves, or where could we increase our transparency? So there's so many different prompts and ways of doing things that go beyond the traditional stop, start, continue. Many prompts, they do have their origins in the kind of what went well, what didn't go well, what should we do next time,
Hmm.
because that's what a retro is all about, inspection and adaptation. But just rewording them, making the questions not stale and repetitive, can result in very different outcomes.
Hmm.
Okay, so the team has chosen the prompts. I then invite them to diverge silently. Okay, and I say silently, it depends if we're doing a musical retrospective, we might have music playing in the background, Queen or whatever, right?
Sure.
What I'm in trying to bring about by silent reflection is I'm trying to avoid dominance hierarchies. I'm trying to ensure that every quieter voice has their say. Okay, so everyone gets their thoughts down, and if we're physically in a room, that might be on post-it notes, and then they place them all up on a board at the same time. And if we're doing it using virtual tool like Miro or Mural, it's done on a virtual whiteboard, and people are getting their thoughts down. So that's the silent divergence.
Hmm.
I then invite everyone to just review what we've put there. Is everything clear? Are there any misunderstandings? Does anyone need anything clarified? So we begin to create a collective understanding as to where we are before narrowing down which of these points are most important, right? So we've got one prompt, we've got what do we super like as a team? There might be 10 plus items noted down.
Hmm.
Again, there's a narrowing down of what's most important to continue doing in the future. So we're not going to try and do everything. We're going to try and
Hmm.
focus on one thing. So again, we empower the audience to down select the most important thing.
Okay.
And then from that, we create an action. Okay.
Hmm.
So I'm not a fan of doing a retro where you just chuck a load of things on boards in silence for 15 minutes, and then you try and get around to doing actions. And then the time you're building actions is compressed to the end of the retrospective when your attention spans are starting to suffer and you're
Hmm.
thinking about the next meeting and otherwise, and
Right.
sometimes you end up with no good actions from a retro. I do it iteratively. So one prompt at a time, empower the team to choose, silent divergence, converge back as a team, narrow down to the most important thing, pull an action from it with ideally with an owner and something clear, and we know what we're doing. Then we can move on to the next prompt. And again, they will choose the next most important prompt. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If we get to 3 to 5 actions, retro's done, right? We don't need to continue using up that time. I like a bias towards action. Again, I'm a big fan of musical quotes, so a little less conversation, a little more action, to quote Elvis.
Yeah.
We finish up the retro with retroception, so retroing the retro itself. How valuable was this use of time? And there are lots of ways of doing that. I've kind of created my own 5-point scale, where one is, the team may have some people might have been missing. We've discussed items, but we haven't really captured actions that are tangible, that sort of thing, all the way to 5, where everyone spoke openly without fear of judgment or had a lack of psychological safety. We've got clear actions with owners that are planned into our future iterations, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how a themed retro would go for me.
I see. Well, I mean, there's a lot to like there, right? This is one of the things that, as we talked on LinkedIn, began to soften me some, is how much emphasis you put on the team selecting the pieces that are valuable to them, as opposed to you as the facilitator dictating a structure, dictating the prompts, dictating everything. We've all heard the horror story about, like, the Scrum Master shows up, they're brand new to the team, and all of a sudden they replace all the team's icons with Star Wars stuff, and half the team doesn't even like Star Wars, but that Scrum Master wants to be fun, they want to.
Yeah.
So I really like how, you want to put the team in kind of a different frame of mind, but at the same time, you're not going to tell them, okay, look, guys, we're all dressing up like our favorite Star Wars characters today. It's very much driven by them. What things are going to be valuable to them, what prompts are the most valuable to them. So I really like that.
Firm believer in that.
Yeah,
I'm not here
absolutely.
to force fun on people at all, but I'm here to try and create an environment where fun can be something that we
Sure.
embrace, that we enjoy. It might be, and there's something that's happened with some teams of mine, is that you end up with a rotational format where one time you're doing Star Wars, then you're doing Star Trek for all you know, and
Oh, so
then
you
you might
get
have a
both
bit of
sides of the
rivalry.
debate. Yeah.
Well, yeah, could get both sides. It might be that you've got a retro that happens where it's all about food one time, and then it's all about music, and it just ends up being a showcase of the whole team's collective differences, different likes and dislikes. Everyone gets a turn. I actually build into my templates a choose your next retro, question. So what is it going to be? And they can either select from a selection or just give me some ideas and I'll create a new one for them.
Oh, that's really interesting. I almost wonder, if you get a team that really is used to this, right, and they're really clicking along, if it's something you can even just hand over to them, right? Like one of you do the next retro, right, in a theme that's of interest to you. And
So I'm writing a book on retrospectives, and it's all about continuous improvement, and it's got all these plays. Plays is what I call them, ways of leveling up your continuous improvement game. And for me, as a coach, my role is to make myself redundant. I don't want to create a dependency upon me. I want to reduce that dependency on me, and I want to create this skill, the collective skill for facilitating continuous improvement into the team. One of the ways I do that is I encourage others to facilitate the retrospective. So I show them one way of doing this, and I help them with creating templates or otherwise. One of my favorite stories of this happening is that it just became a collective thing. They took a rotation, everyone took a turn. We had a Pokemon themed one. We had one called the Christopher Murray retrospective, which was based on the tech lead of that team, right? So they had lots of photos of Christopher Murray, his mannerisms. It was all built around him, and everyone had a laugh, and it was a very unique thing for their team. It was one of my favorite experiences, and I didn't do that. All I did was inspire them to try and do things a bit differently, and they took that upon themselves.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Gosh, imagine having a themed retro about you. The other thing that I liked a lot about what you were describing is the attention that you give to psychological safety and making sure that everyone is in an environment where they can fully share themselves. Which is always a challenge, right? And I would definitely recommend to any of our listeners, whatever you do with your retrospectives, themed, unthemed, traditional, non-traditional, whatever, that you spend some time giving as much attention to that as as Chris has said, maybe even adopting some of those things yourself, because I think everyone, especially newer Scrum Masters, really struggle with that. There's always that person who doesn't speak up. And it may be because they legitimately don't have anything they want to say, but sometimes it's exactly the reasons you specified. There's a power dynamic, or there's one or two really dominant people in the group, and people are afraid that their ideas are going to get shot down. So I really appreciated that time that you dedicate to that.
Another bit of advice for anyone facing any challenges, quiet team members, or perhaps there is a perception of low psychological safety in the team. I have created a retrospective around psychological safety. So it's based on the works of Amy Edmondson, a doctor who focuses on this, does her research on this, and she posited 7 questions that you can use to just do almost like a baseline check. Where is your team right now with regards to their psychological safety? Okay. So you, as a team, collectively will do that. You'll end up doing a bit of a rating, so 1 to 5, for example, a bit of a Likert scale against these 7 statements. And from that, you get a current view. Where are we now? And then you could, again, down select the most important areas to address. So if you've got something that's scoring quite poorly, what could we do differently there? And there's some prompts around what you might do differently or how you could stimulate those conversations as to what you could do differently. So one option that a team might use. I don't just create retros about fun, movies, television, video games, and otherwise. I also create them based on psychological theory and books. Autonomy, Mastery, Purpose is a recent one by Dan Pink, Drive, the infamous book. I've done one around, obviously, psychological safety. I do them about things that just inspire me to think differently. It's not all just
Nice.
about, again, force fun.
Right. Not just about sci-fi or whatever, but actual live topics that are kind of in the air at the time.
Yeah,
Um,
like for example, you could do the 8 wastes retrospective. That was a recent one of mine,
yeah, I remember
and that
that one.
looks specifically at the wastes of software development or indeed lean manufacturing. And you've got the 8 wastes, and you've got the detail as to what they are and how they impact a team. And again, you empower the team. Which of these 3 areas do we suffer with most? You've identified what they are, and then you generate insights as to how the team could take a small step in the right direction to removing some of that waste.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, I've got one last thing I'd like to give you the opportunity to share with us about, Chris. There was one thing that came up in our discussion that kind of surprised me. Not that your view surprised me, but it was a surprise to see that this was kind of an underlying assumption that sort of came up in our differences of opinion that I thought was really interesting. I do know we think very differently about this issue, which is fine. And it would probably take a whole lot more discussion to get us to think. It doesn't take too much to encourage me to bring Queen into a retrospective, but this particular issue, it might take a little more discussion for. But I wanted to give you a chance to talk about it because I thought you had a really good argument. I definitely appreciated where you were coming from, and it made a lot of sense, even though ultimately I have a different opinion on that. And so it's the issue of, is it better for a team to talk about lots of different areas of improvement, or is it better for a team to focus on one area of improvement? And kind of give us your thoughts on that.
So I often describe that I am an outcome focused person. Okay. And what I mean by that is when it comes to agility, I describe myself as agnostic, right? I'm not aligned or wedded to any particular framework or way of working. And
Good.
if a team finds that using waterfall techniques, which isn't a dirty word, by the way, waterfall isn't
Right.
a bad word.
Right.
If a team finds that works for them and it helps them deliver the outcomes they're looking for or solve the problems they're trying to solve, then great. That's okay. It's not a us versus them situation. To me, when I'm working with teams, organizations, or otherwise, my first question is, what outcomes are we looking for, or what problems are we trying to solve? Second question is, are our current ways of working, I say ways of working, I'm not saying agile or waterfall, I'm saying, are our current ways of working helping us achieve those outcomes or solve those problems? And last question, are we continuously improving those ways of working? So I'm outcome focused, not solution focused. Now, what you've just posed there as a question is it preferable to narrow in on a single thing or focus on lots of different things in parallel? I hate answering that it depends on the team, but it does,
It
because
does, sure.
fundamentally it depends on their situation, their context, the people involved, the culture you're playing with, right? There are many ways of doing things. That's why my book is called a playbook, is because it's not me trying to say, here is going to fix these are going to fix all your problems. It's me saying, here is a bunch of options you have at your disposal to try, experiment with. Some may work, some may not. Where I come from with regards to focusing on lots of different areas is it comes from my experiences with change. It's easier, I have found, to make small improvements to lots of little areas rather than necessarily completely focus on one area entirely. I often talk about the story of Sky Cycling
Hmm.
and how they went from relatively being mediocre or unknown on at the international scale, never having won a Tour de France and otherwise, to becoming dominant in their field within less than 5 years, I believe it was, because of their approach to making small 1% marginal gains in lots of different areas. And I'm a fan of that because small change is easier to make. You're trying to run a marathon, right? You don't suddenly run a marathon the next day. You go, right, what I need to do is I need to start training. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by running a mile. And then you build up over time and you improve your diet and you build in the habits to help you get to that.
Hmm.
And for me, making those small improvements, those small changes result in less resistance, but they can aggregate to great results. So that's I guess where I come from on it. It's always contextual, outcome focused first. It's always about the outcome, and if you're achieving the outcome, that's the important thing. Whether it's focusing on one area or multiple areas, it's the outcome that matters.
Yeah, and on that aspect of it, I couldn't agree with you more. I've told clients before, hey, if dressing up in chipmunk costumes gets you the outcomes that you're looking for, then you need to find where the nearest chipmunk costume is. It's really all about, are you solving the problems that you need to solve? 100% behind you on that. Okay, well, that's about all I've got in terms of the things that I really wanted to make sure that our listeners got a chance to hear. Is there anything else before we sign off, Chris, that you would like to share about this topic or about Agile in general? Most of the listeners to our show are people who are trying to be more agile at their organizations and maybe running into difficulties or need some different ideas about how to do some different things. Is there anything here at the end you'd like to say?
So I like to think of everything as an experiment. It's always an experiment. And
Hmm.
I find that change is easier to bring about when you think of it as an experiment.
Hmm.
People hate something being forced upon them. So if you reframe it
Right.
as an experiment and you invite them to be part of that change rather than inflict change upon them, I find it tends to work a lot better because then you're co-creating something rather than just forcing change upon them. Other than that, just continue to experiment with yourself. Don't just do retrospectives with your teams. Inspect about and adapt how you work. I call it solo spection, right? Think about the end of the week. What value have I helped bring about today? Where could I have been better? What would I like to learn next week? You can use those same techniques to improve how you work also. And other than that, just create new things, share them with community, continuously challenge existing ways of working,
Hmm.
and collectively together as an agile community, we'll create some great things.
Well, that's great. I don't know that I could have said any of that better myself. That is all great advice. So, everyone, this has been Chris Stone on our podcast. You can find him on LinkedIn. That's where I follow him, and a lot of the things he's been talking about come up in his feed for your use. Chris, is there anywhere else you'd like to share for people to find you?
Yes, so LinkedIn is one of the mediums I share my content upon. I also have a website. It's www.thevirtualagilecoach.co.uk. You can access over 100 templates, not just on retrospectives, but on continuous improvements, on agile games, on various canvases and otherwise, all freely accessible. Just jump on there and you can access it. I also have a YouTube channel where I've got a lot of my video content. And yeah, other than that, it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me and yeah, continuing the debate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not even sure how much of a debate we have anymore, but I really appreciate you sharing some other views on this topic, and it's been a delight to have you, Chris.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.